I didn't know his name, I just knew he was dying. I acted on instinct, called for help, pulled him out, did what any human would have done.
But when the sirens came, they didn't thank me. They put me in handcuffs.
They said I'd crossed a line, broken a rule, interfered with an investigation. I saved a life that night, and somehow that made me a criminal.
I didn't know his name. I just knew he was dying. The rain hammered down on Highway 42 that November night, turning the asphalt into a black mirror reflecting red and blue lights. I was driving home from my shift at Henderson County Hospital, exhausted, my scrubs still damp from a 12-hour rotation in the ER. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m. That's when I saw the car. It was wrapped around the guardrail like a crushed soda can, steam rising from the crumpled hood, one headlight still flickering weakly into the darkness. My heart seized. I pulled over immediately, hands shaking as I grabbed my phone and called 911. "There's been an accident on Highway 42, mile marker 18, I said, already running toward the wreck. "Single vehicle. I'm a nurse. I'm going to check for survivors." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, but I wasn't really listening anymore, because that's when I heard it, a sound that every medical professional learns to recognize, a sound that cuts through everything else. Someone was choking. I reached the driver's side door and looked inside. A man, maybe 40 years old, was slumped against the steering wheel, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. But worse, so much worse, his face was turning blue. His airway was blocked. He had minutes, maybe less. "Sir, can you hear me?" I shouted, yanking at the door handle. It wouldn't budge. The impact had warped the frame. His eyes found mine, wide, terrified, desperate. He was conscious enough to know he was dying. I acted on instinct. I ran to the passenger side, found that door jammed too, then grabbed a rock from the roadside and smashed the rear window. Glass exploded inward. I didn't care. I climbed through, cutting my arms on the remaining shards, and squeezed between the seats to reach him. His lips were nearly purple now. No time for finesse. I released his seatbelt and pulled him backward, trying to clear his airway. He was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I got my arms under his and dragged him out through the back, laying him on the wet pavement. That's when I saw it, a piece of something, maybe part of his steering wheel, lodged in his throat. I did a finger sweep, felt the object, pulled it out. Blood came with it. Then I tilted his head back and started rescue breathing. 1 breath, 2 breaths. His chest rose. Color started returning to his face. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, stay with me." He coughed, sputtered, took a gasping, beautiful breath on his own. I nearly cried with relief. That's when the sirens came. 2 police cars and an ambulance pulled up, flooding the scene with light. I stood up, covered in this man's blood and my own, ready to hand him off to the paramedics, ready to finally breathe myself. "Step away from him," a voice commanded. I turned. A sheriff's deputy was walking toward me, his hand resting on his belt, not on his radio, on his gun. "I'm a nurse," I said, confused. "I just pulled him out. He was choking. His airway was blocked. Step away from the vehicle and the victim. Now." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. This wasn't gratitude. This wasn't relief. "Officer? I don't understand. Hands behind your back." I felt the cold metal of handcuffs click around my wrists before my brain could even process what was happening. The paramedics rushed past me to the man I'd just saved, and I stood there in the rain, restrained, watching them load him into the ambulance. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I called 911. I saved his life. What's happening?" The deputy's face was stone. "You tampered with an active crime scene. You moved evidence. You interfered with an ongoing investigation." "Investigation?" He was dying. The vehicle was flagged in a hit-and-run that killed a teenager 2 miles back. "You just contaminated our entire case." The world tilted. They said I'd crossed a line, broken a rule, interfered with justice. I saved a life that night, and somehow, that made me a criminal. The inside of a police station at midnight smells like burnt coffee and desperation. I sat in an interrogation room, an actual interrogation room, like something out of a crime show, still in my blood-stained scrubs, my hands finally free from the handcuffs, but shaking uncontrollably. A female detective sat across from me, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Rachel Hartley," she said, reading from a file. age 32, registered nurse at Henderson County Hospital, 9 years of service, no prior arrests. She looked up. Until tonight. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice hoarse. That man was dying. His airway was compromised. He had maybe 3 minutes before brain damage would have been irreversible. I didn't think. I just acted. That's the problem, Ms. Hartley. You didn't think. She leaned forward. At 10:15 p.m. tonight, a vehicle matching the description of that car struck and killed 17-year-old Maya Chen as she walked home from her friend's house. The driver fled the scene. We had officers en route to secure that vehicle when you arrived. The name hit me like a physical blow. Maya Chen, 17 years old. Someone's daughter. I didn't know, I whispered. Your fingerprints are now all over that vehicle. The victim, the suspect, was moved, potentially destroying evidence of alcohol use, positioning, anything that could prove he was the driver. His clothes were contaminated with your DNA. And that piece of debris you removed from his throat? We needed that in situ for accident reconstruction. In situ? I felt heat rising in my chest. He would have been dead in situ. Is that what you wanted? What I want is irrelevant. What matters is the law. The law? I stood up, my chair scraping back. I'm legally obligated to provide care in an emergency. I'm a nurse. I have a duty to act. You had a duty not to contaminate a crime scene. Her voice hardened. That girl's family deserves justice, and you may have just made it impossible to convict her killer. The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. I sat back down slowly, the reality of what she was saying settling over me like concrete. I hadn't just saved a man. I might have saved a murderer, and in doing so, I might have destroyed the only chance to prove it. What happens now? I asked quietly. You're being charged with obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. You'll be arraigned in the morning. I suggest you call a lawyer. They let me make one phone call. I dialed my sister, Jennifer, and tried to explain through tears what had happened. She didn't understand. How could she? I barely understood myself. By the time they released me on my own recognizance at 4 a.m., the story had already leaked. My phone had 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. The local news had gotten hold of it somehow. Nurse arrested after saving accident victim. Destroyed evidence in fatal hit and run. I drove home in a daze as the sun began to rise over a city that suddenly felt hostile. The investigation would eventually reveal something I didn't know that night. The accident happened just outside the city limits, in a jurisdiction that would become crucial to my case. The exact location, the exact boundaries, would matter more than I could have imagined. Can you guess which city this happened near? Drop the name in the comments. You might be surprised by how much the location shaped what happened next. When I walked into my apartment, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked like I'd aged 10 years in one night. Blood still streaked my arms where the glass had cut me. My scrubs were ruined. My eyes were hollow. I took a shower and watched rust-colored water spiral down the drain. Someone's blood. Maybe the blood of a killer. Maybe the blood of just another human being who'd made a terrible mistake. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and did what I always do when the world stops making sense. I tried to make sense of it anyway. The call came from a lawyer I'd never met before. Ms. Hartley? My name is David Brennan. I heard about your case, and I'd like to represent you. I was sitting in my living room, curtains drawn, watching my phone blow up with notifications I didn't have the courage to read. It had been less than 24 hours since my arrest, but it felt like a lifetime. I can't afford a lawyer, I said flatly. I'm not asking you to pay me. Not yet, anyway. His voice was warm, gentle. I'm a defense attorney here in Millbrook. I've been practicing for 23 years, and I'm also a former paramedic. That got my attention. You were a paramedic? For 7 years before law school. So when I heard about a nurse being arrested for saving someone's life, let's just say it struck a nerve. He paused. Rachel? Can I call you Rachel? Sure. Rachel, you did what you were trained to do, what you were morally and professionally obligated to do, and the state is trying to punish you for it. That's not just wrong, it's dangerous. If you're convicted, it sends a message to every first responder in this country. Don't help, or we'll make you the criminal. I felt tears burning behind my eyes again. Someone finally understood. When can we meet? I asked. David Brennan's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind with creaky wood floors and tall windows that let in streams of dusty sunlight. He was in his early 50s, with gray at his temples, and the kind of steady presence that made you feel like everything might actually be okay. He spread the case files across his desk while I told him everything, every detail from that night. The rain, the choking sounds, the way the man's eyes had pleaded with me. Did they identify him yet? I asked. The driver? David nodded grimly. Robert Allen Mitchum, age 42, accounting manager, divorced father of 2. And yes, his blood alcohol level was .12, well over the legal limit. My hands clenched into fists. He killed that girl while driving drunk, and I saved him. You saved a human being, David corrected gently. You didn't know who he was or what he'd done. You saw someone dying and you acted. That's not a crime, Rachel. That's humanity. Then why am I the one facing charges? Because the prosecutor, Martin Voss, is up for re-election in 6 months. Maya Chen's death made national news. Drunk driver kills honor student. There's enormous public pressure to secure a conviction. And right now, according to his office, you're the reason he might not be able to. That's insane. That's politics. David leaned back in his chair. But here's what they're not telling you. I've already reviewed the evidence logs. Yes, you moved the suspect. Yes, you touched the vehicle. But the car's dashcam was still recording. There's footage of him driving erratically for 3 minutes before the crash. His phone records show he was texting. The impact patterns are clear. There is overwhelming evidence that Robert Mitchum was driving drunk and caused Maya Chen's death. Then why charge me at all? Because Voss needs a scapegoat. If the case gets messy, if Mitchum's defense attorney finds any technicality, Voss can point at you and say, the nurse destroyed critical evidence. You become his insurance policy. I felt sick. Can we fight this? We can. And we will. David pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. First, we're going to file a motion to dismiss based on Good Samaritan laws and professional duty to act. Second, we're going to gather every piece of evidence that proves Mitchum was guilty regardless of your intervention. Third, we're going to make the public understand what really happened that night. The public already hates me, I said quietly. Have you seen the comments online? His expression softened. I have. But Rachel, the court of public opinion isn't where this case will be decided. And I promise you, when a jury hears your story, the real story, they're going to see exactly what I see. What's that? A hero who's being punished for refusing to let someone die. The arraignment was a blur of legal terminology I barely understood. I stood before Judge Catherine Palmer, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back tight, and listened as the prosecutor outlined the charges against me. Obstruction of justice, tampering with physical evidence. Each word felt like a stone added to a growing weight on my chest. How does the defendant plead? Judge Palmer asked. Not guilty, Your Honor, David said firmly, his hand on my shoulder. Bail was set, thankfully low, given my clean record and stable employment. I was released with an ankle monitor and a court date set for 3 months away. 3 months of my life in limbo, waiting to find out if I'd be convicted for saving someone's life. As we left the courthouse, a crowd of reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Ms. Hartley, do you regret your actions? Did you know you were helping a killer? What do you say to Maya Chen's family? David pulled me through the crowd to his car, but not before I caught sight of something that made my heart stop. A group of people holding signs. One read, Justice for Maya. Another, Nurses aren't above the law. And in the center, a woman holding a framed photograph of a beautiful teenage girl with long black hair and a bright smile. Maya's mother. Our eyes met for just a second. The pain in her face was so raw, so devastating, that I had to look away. Shame burned through me. Irrational, I knew, but real nonetheless. Don't, David said quietly as we drove away. Don't let them make you feel guilty for being human. But I did feel guilty. How could I not? Now that night, I returned to work for the first time since my arrest. I'd taken 2 days off, one to recover, one to meet with David, but I couldn't afford more. I had bills to pay, and besides, the hospital was the only place that still made sense. The only place where the rules were clear. Save lives, no matter what. Or so I thought. Rachel, can I see you in my office? Linda Morrison, the nursing director, stood in the doorway of the break room. Her expression was carefully neutral, which meant bad news. I followed her down the hallway to her cramped office filled with filing cabinets and inspirational posters about teamwork. She gestured for me to sit. How are you holding up? She asked, her tone gentle. I'm managing. Rachel, you've been an exemplary nurse here for 9 years. Your patient outcomes are excellent. Your colleagues respect you. Your dedication is unquestionable. The past tense made my stomach drop. Linda, please don't. I'm placing you on administrative leave. Effective immediately. The room tilted. You're firing me? Not firing. Leave, with pay, until this legal situation is resolved. She sighed, suddenly looking very tired. The hospital administration feels that given the media attention, your presence could be disruptive to patients, to staff morale. I fought for you, Rachel. I really did, but the decision came from above my head. I saved someone's life, I said, my voice breaking. That's what we do. That's what you taught me to do. I know. And between you and me, what happened to you is unconscionable. She leaned forward. But we have to think about the hospital's reputation. We have to think about liability, if patients or their families become uncomfortable. So you're protecting the hospital at my expense. She didn't deny it. Take the time. Let your lawyer handle the legal battle. And hopefully, when this is all over, you can come back. Hopefully. I walked out of that hospital feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The place that had been my second home, where I'd learned my craft, where I'd saved countless lives. They didn't want me anymore. That night, I sat in my apartment and finally let myself read the online comments. It was a mistake. She destroyed evidence to protect a drunk driver. This is what happens when people think they're above the law. That poor girl's family will never get justice because of this nurse. But then, buried in the hatred, I found something else. A comment from someone with the username, EMTMike79. I would have done the exact same thing. We're trained to save lives first. Worry about everything else later. This nurse is being scapegoated. Don't let them destroy her for doing her job. One voice of support in a sea of condemnation. It was something. The thing about being publicly vilified is that it doesn't stay in the news. It follows you everywhere. I started noticing it in small ways first. The neighbor who used to smile and wave when I checked the mail now turned away. The barista at my usual coffee shop who knew my order by heart suddenly asked me to repeat it. Wouldn't meet my eyes. Anonymous letters started arriving at my apartment, some supportive but most filled with anger, telling me I was a disgrace to the nursing profession. You should come stay with me, my sister Jennifer offered during one of our nightly phone calls. She lived 3 hours away in Columbus. Get out of Millbrook for a while. And what? Hide? I was lying on my couch in the dark, too exhausted to even turn on the TV. That makes me look guilty. You're not guilty, Rach. Everyone who knows you knows that. But nobody knows me anymore, Jen. That's the problem. David had filed our motion to dismiss, arguing that Good Samaritan laws and my professional duty as a nurse made the charges legally unsound. But the prosecutor's office had responded with a brief that essentially argued I wasn't protected because I'd interfered with a law enforcement investigation, a criminal matter, not just a medical emergency. It's a weak argument, David assured me during one of our strategy sessions. But Voss is playing to public opinion more than legal precedent. He wants headlines that say, DA fights to protect evidence integrity, not DA prosecutes nurse for saving life. So what do? We build our own narrative, and we start with character witnesses. Over the next 2 weeks, David interviewed dozens of people, colleagues from the hospital, former patients, my professors from nursing school. He was building a portrait of who I really was, not the evidence-destroying criminal the prosecution wanted to paint, but a dedicated healthcare professional who'd acted exactly as she'd been trained. But the most powerful testimony came from someone I never expected. Rachel Hartley saved my husband's life. David and I looked up from his desk to see a woman standing in his office doorway. She was in her mid-60s, with kind eyes and silver hair. I'm Martha Brennan, she said, then smiled at David's surprised expression. No relation, different spelling, but I saw the news story about your case, Ms. Hartley, and I had to come. She sat down and told us her story. 4 years ago, her husband had a heart attack while driving. He'd veered off the road and crashed into a telephone pole. I was in the passenger seat. I was screaming, didn't know what to do. And then Rachel appeared. She'd been driving behind us and saw it happen. She pulled him out, started CPR right there on the side of the road. She saved his life. Tears streamed down my face. I barely remembered that incident. It had been one of dozens of emergency situations I'd responded to over the years. I never got to thank you properly, Martha continued. By the time the ambulance arrived and took George to the hospital, you were gone. But I never forgot. And when I saw what they're doing to you now, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. These are letters from our family, our friends, people whose lives you've touched. I want to testify. I want the court to know who you really are. David took the folder with something like awe in his eyes. Mrs. Brennan, this is "This is extraordinary. It's the truth," she said simply, then turned to me. "Don't you dare let them make you feel ashamed for having a good heart." After she left, I sat in David's office and cried, the first tears of relief I'd shed in weeks. "We're going to win this," David said quietly. "I promise you, Rachel. We're going to win." I wanted to believe him, but the hearing on our motion to dismiss was still 2 weeks away, and every day felt like an eternity. What I didn't know then was that everything was about to change, because Robert Mitchum, the man I'd saved, was about to wake up from his medically induced coma, and he was about to tell a story that nobody expected. The headline appeared on a Tuesday morning: "Mitchum awakens, claims no memory of crash." I was sitting in David's office when he saw the news alert on his phone. His expression darkened immediately. "What?" I asked. "What is it?" He turned the screen toward me. The article quoted Robert Mitchum's attorney, a high-powered defense lawyer named Patricia Valdez, stating that her client had suffered a traumatic brain injury in the crash and had no recollection of the events leading up to it. "He doesn't remember," I said slowly. "Or he's claiming he doesn't remember. It's a common defense strategy in cases like this," David explained. "Memory loss, whether real or fabricated, makes him a more sympathetic defendant. It's harder to convict someone who genuinely seems to have no awareness of what they did. But there's evidence. You said there was dashcam footage. There is. But Valdez is already arguing that your intervention compromised the chain of custody for that evidence. She's claiming that because you moved Mitchum, handled the vehicle, removed debris from the scene, any evidence collected afterward is potentially tainted." The room felt like it was spinning. "She's using me to defend him." "Exactly. And Voss is using you to excuse any weaknesses in his case against Mitchum. You've become the central figure in a trial that isn't even supposed to be about you." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Millbrook's main street. People going about their normal lives, shopping, laughing, living without the weight of the legal system crushing them. "I need to talk to him," I said suddenly. "Who?" "Mitchum. I need to talk to Robert Mitchum." David stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. "Absolutely not. Rachel, that's the worst possible idea. He needs to know what he did." I turned to face him. "He needs to understand that his actions that night didn't just kill Maya Chen. They destroyed my life too. Maybe if he knows, if he really understands, you can't. Legally, ethically, strategically, you cannot contact him or anyone involved in his case. It would be witness tampering, it would destroy our defense, and it would give Voss exactly what he needs to bury you. Then what do I do?" My voice cracked. "Just sit here and wait while they tear apart my life?" David's expression softened. He walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "You do what you've been doing. You show up. You tell the truth. You let people see who you really are. And if that's not enough, then we fight harder." And that night, I broke my own rule and went online to read about Robert Mitchum. What I found was complicated. Before the crash, he'd been a regular person. Divorced, yes, but by all accounts a devoted father to his 2 daughters, ages 8 and 11. He'd coached soccer, volunteered at the local food bank, worked a steady job for 15 years. His ex-wife had issued a statement saying he wasn't a bad person, just someone who'd made a catastrophic mistake. There was a photo of him from before the accident, smiling at a company picnic, arm around a colleague, looking like someone's dad, someone's friend, not a monster, just human, and that somehow made it worse. I thought about Maya Chen, whose entire future had been stolen. I thought about her mother's face outside the courthouse, holding that photograph. I thought about the fact that I'd saved the person who'd taken all of that away, but I also thought about those 3 minutes on the highway, the sound of him choking, the terror in his eyes, the way his chest had risen when I'd finally cleared his airway. In that moment, he hadn't been a drunk driver. He hadn't been a killer. He'd been a human being dying in front of me, and I'd done what every fiber of my training, my ethics, my humanity demanded. I'd tried to save him. Was I supposed to apologize for that? The hearing on our motion to dismiss was 1 week away. 7 days until I'd stand before a judge and argue that saving a life shouldn't be a crime. 7 days until I'd find out if the law agreed. I barely slept that week. But I wasn't alone in that, because Maya Chen's family wasn't sleeping either, and they were about to make their voices heard. The courthouse steps were crowded the morning of the hearing. I'd expected media. What I hadn't expected was the sheer number of people who'd shown up, on both sides. On the left, a group of nurses and EMTs in their uniforms, holding signs that read, "Medical duty first," and prosecute criminals, not caregivers. David had told me about them, a grassroots movement called Healthcare Workers for Rachel that had formed online and spread across social media. I'd never met most of them, but they'd organized this show of support. On the right, Maya Chen's family and their supporters held photos of the girl who'd been killed, her mother, father, younger brother, their faces etched with grief that hadn't faded in the weeks since her death. Their signs read, "Justice for Maya," and "Evidence matters." Both sides were right. That was the cruelest part. "Don't look," David murmured, guiding me up the steps. "Keep your head up, stay focused." But I couldn't help it. I made eye contact with Maya's mother again. This time, she didn't look away. Instead, she stepped forward. "Ms. Hartley," she called out. Her voice was hoarse, raw with grief. David tried to pull me forward, but I stopped. I owed her this moment, whatever it would bring. "I'm so sorry," I said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for everything." Her eyes filled with tears. "Did you know? When you pulled him out of that car, did you know what he'd done?" "No," I said honestly. "I just knew he was dying." She nodded slowly, and for a moment, I thought I saw something shift in her expression. Not forgiveness. It was too soon for that. Maybe too soon forever. But understanding, perhaps. A glimpse of the impossible position we'd all been put in. "My daughter would have helped him too," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Maya wanted to be a doctor. She would have saved him just like you did." And then she turned and walked back to her family, and I stood there on the courthouse steps with tears streaming down my face. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Judge Palmer presided from her bench, looking every bit as stern as she had during my arraignment. Prosecutor Martin Voss sat at his table with 2 assistants, their files stacked high. David and I took our seats at the defense table. "This is a hearing on the defense's motion to dismiss all charges against Rachel Hartley," Judge Palmer began. "Mr. Brennan, you may proceed." David stood, and I'd never been more grateful for his presence. He was calm, measured, authoritative. "Your Honor, my client is a registered nurse with 9 years of exemplary service. On the night in question, she encountered what any reasonable person would identify as a medical emergency. A man with a blocked airway. Minutes from death. She did exactly what her professional training, her legal obligations under Good Samaritan laws, and basic human decency demanded. She provided emergency medical care. He walked the judge through the timeline, emphasized my 911 call, noted that I'd acted before knowing anything about a hit-and-run investigation. The prosecution wants to punish Ms. Hartley for prioritizing a human life over evidence preservation. But, Your Honor, that's not just wrong. It's dangerous. It sends a chilling message to every healthcare worker, every first responder in this state. Let people die or face criminal charges. Voss stood for his rebuttal, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this isn't about medical care. This is about a crime scene. Ms. Hartley had no authority to move the suspect, to handle the vehicle, to remove evidence. Her actions, however well-intentioned, compromised our ability to prosecute a man who killed a 17-year-old girl while driving drunk. The evidence against Mr. Mitchum remains overwhelming," David countered. "Dashcam footage, phone records, blood alcohol levels, none of that was affected by my client's actions. The prosecution is scapegoating Ms. Hartley to cover for any weaknesses in their own case." The arguments went on for 2 hours. Character witnesses testified, including Martha Brennan, whose emotional account of how I'd saved her husband left half the courtroom in tears. Finally, Judge Palmer called for a recess. "I'll issue my ruling by the end of the week," she announced. 3 more days of waiting, 3 more days of my life hanging in the balance. But something had shifted in that courtroom. I'd felt it. The truth was finally being heard. The call came on a Friday afternoon. I was at home, staring at my phone, willing it to ring while simultaneously dreading the moment it would. Jennifer had flown in to stay with me, and she sat on the couch holding my hand, both of us too anxious to speak. When David's name appeared on the screen, my heart nearly stopped. "Rachel?" His voice was carefully controlled, and I couldn't read it. "Tell me," I whispered. The judge granted our motion. All charges dismissed. I heard the words, but they didn't register at first. Jennifer was looking at me, eyes wide with question. I couldn't speak. "Rachel? Did you hear me? You won. It's over." "I won," I repeated numbly, and then the reality of it hit me and I started sobbing. Relief, joy, disbelief, all of it crashing over me at once. Jennifer pulled me into a hug and we both cried. Judge Palmer issued a 17-page ruling. David continued. his voice thick with emotion. She eviscerated the prosecution's case, cited Good Samaritan laws, medical duty to act, the lack of criminal intent. Rachel, she wrote that punishing healthcare workers for providing emergency care would create a dangerous precedent that undermines public safety and human decency. And those were her exact words. "What about Mitchum's case?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "Unaffected. The judge ruled that the evidence against him remains solid regardless of your intervention. His trial will proceed. Justice for Maya Chen will proceed. You were just removed from being collateral damage in that process." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. It was over. The nightmare that had consumed my life for months was actually over. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, hollowed out. My phone started buzzing with messages. Colleagues from the hospital congratulating me. Friends I hadn't heard from in weeks suddenly reappearing. The hospital administrator calling to say my administrative leave was lifted, and I could return to work whenever I was ready. That night, the local news ran the story. The headline, "Charges dismissed against nurse in controversial case." I watched the coverage with Jennifer, saw clips of David reading from the judge's ruling, saw interviews with other nurses calling it a victory for healthcare workers everywhere. But they also interviewed Maya Chen's family. Her father, composed but clearly struggling, said, "We're grateful that Ms. Hartley won't face criminal charges. She was doing her job, but our daughter is still gone, and the man who killed her is still alive because of those actions. That's something we'll have to live with forever." The complexity of that statement, the grace and the grief intertwined, broke my heart all over again. 3 weeks later, I returned to work. Walking back into Henderson County Hospital felt surreal. The same hallways, the same smells of antiseptic and coffee, the same rhythm of beeping monitors and overhead pages. But I was different. This place was different. Or maybe it was just that I could finally see it clearly again. "Welcome back, Rachel." Linda Morrison met me at the nurse's station with a warm smile. "We've missed you." "Thanks, Linda." My first shift back was quiet. Linda had made sure of that, giving me a light assignment to ease back in. But around hour 6, the ER got a call about an incoming trauma from a car accident. My body tensed immediately. Every nurse around me paused, watching to see my reaction. I took a deep breath. "What do we know? Single vehicle? Rolled over on Highway 42, the charge nurse said carefully. "Driver is conscious, stable vitals, but complaining of chest pain. Highway 42, the same road where this all began." "I'll take it," I said. Linda stepped forward. "Rachel, you don't have to. I'll take it," I repeated, more firmly this time. When the ambulance arrived, I was ready. The patient was a woman in her 50s, frightened but alert. I assessed her vitals, checked for internal injuries, started an IV, did everything I'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, I was fully present for it, not just going through the motions, but remembering why I'd chosen this profession in the first place. To help, to heal, to see human beings at their most vulnerable, and offer them care without judgment. The woman grabbed my hand as we wheeled her to imaging. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being here." I squeezed back. That's what I'm here for. And that night, I drove home past the spot where Robert Mitchum had crashed. Someone had placed a memorial there. Flowers, photos of Maya Chen, stuffed animals, and candles. I pulled over and got out of my car. The flowers were wilting now, the candles long burned out. But the photos remained. Maya in her school uniform. Maya laughing with friends. Maya holding a trophy, her whole life ahead of her. I stood there in the darkness and let myself feel the full weight of it. The tragedy, the waste, the impossible complexity of what had happened that night. I'd saved a life. That life had taken another life. Both things were true. Both things mattered. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose what to do next. I got back in my car and drove home, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Robert Mitchum's trial began 6 weeks after my charges were dismissed. I wasn't required to testify. The prosecution had decided my involvement would be too controversial, too likely to muddy their case. But I attended anyway, sitting in the back of the courtroom, needing to see it through to the end. Mitchum looked different than he had in that crashed car. Thinner, older, broken in ways that had nothing to do with physical injuries. He sat at the defense table in a gray suit, his hands folded, his expression blank. The trial lasted 8 days. The evidence was overwhelming, just as David had said. Dashcam footage showed Mitchum weaving across lanes in the minutes before the crash, Cell phone records proved he'd been texting. Toxicology confirmed his blood alcohol level. Accident reconstruction experts testified that his vehicle had struck Maya Chen as she walked on the shoulder of the road, sending her into the ditch where she died of massive internal injuries. Witnesses described Mitchum's behavior at a bar earlier that evening: drunk, belligerent, insisting he was fine to drive when the bartender had offered to call him a cab. Maya's family testified about the girl they'd lost. Her mother described finding out that her daughter was gone, the police at her door at midnight. Her father talked about Maya's dreams of becoming a pediatrician, her volunteer work at a youth center, her infectious laugh. Her younger brother, just 14 years old, took the stand and said simply, "She was my best friend, and now she's gone forever." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of crying. Mitchum's defense tried to paint him as a good man who'd made a terrible mistake. They brought in his ex-wife, who testified that he'd never had a drinking problem before. His daughters wrote letters to the judge describing their father as kind and loving. His employer spoke about 15 years of reliable service. "He's not a monster," Patricia Valdez argued in her closing statement. "He's a human being who made a catastrophic error in judgment. He will carry the guilt of what he did for the rest of his life. Isn't that punishment enough?" But Prosecutor Voss's closing was devastating. He held up photos of Maya, alive, vibrant, full of possibility, and then photos from the scene. He didn't show them to the courtroom, but the implication was clear. "The defense wants you to believe this was just a mistake," he said. "But every choice Robert Mitchum made that night was deliberate. He chose to drink. He chose to get behind the wheel. He chose to text while driving. And Maya Chen paid the price for those choices with her life." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vehicular homicide while intoxicated, leaving the scene of an accident. Reckless endangerment. When the verdict was read, Mitchum collapsed forward, his shoulders shaking. His daughters cried in the gallery, and Maya's family held each other, tears of relief and grief streaming down their faces. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow, because Maya was still gone, because Mitchum's daughters would grow up without their father, because no verdict could undo that night. On Sadia. After the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Mitchum received 15 years in prison. I found myself standing outside the courthouse again. Maya's mother approached me slowly, hesitantly. "Ms. Hartley," she said, "I wanted to thank you." I looked at her in confusion. "Thank me? For coming to the trial, for bearing witness. You didn't have to be here. I needed to see it through," I said quietly. "I needed to understand the full scope of what happened that night." She nodded. "What you did, saving him. I was angry about it for a long time. Felt like you'd given him a second chance he didn't deserve, a chance my daughter never got." She paused, composing herself. "But Maya would have done the same thing. She believed in helping people, in seeing their humanity even when it was hard. And I realized that's what you did too." Tears blurred my vision. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine. I know you are." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "And I want you to know, you did the right thing. Even though it hurt, even though it was complicated, you did what a healer is supposed to do. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." We stood there for a moment, 2 women connected by tragedy, finding an unexpected thread of understanding. Then she walked back to her family, and I walked to my car, and we both continued carrying our different kinds of grief into whatever came next. The story could have ended there, but it didn't, because 6 months later, something happened that would change how I saw everything. I received a letter in the mail, postmarked from the state correctional facility. The return address had one name, Robert Mitchum. My hands shook as I opened it. "Dear Ms. Hartley, you don't know me, but you saved my life. I've started this letter 100 times and never known what to say. How do you thank someone for keeping you alive when you destroyed another life that same night? How do you apologize to someone you turned into collateral damage in your own catastrophic failure? I don't remember the crash. That part is true, but I remember everything before it. The bar, the drinks, the decision to drive. I remember knowing I shouldn't, and doing it anyway. I remember thinking I'd be fine, that I'd done it before, that it was just a few miles. I remember being wrong. When I woke up in the hospital and they told me what I'd done, I wanted to die. I wanted to go back to that moment when my airway was blocked and I couldn't breathe, and I wanted to just stop, to not be saved, to not have to live with what I'd done. But you didn't give me that choice. You pulled me back from the edge, because that's what you do. That's who you are. And then you suffered for it. I followed your case from the hospital. I know what they put you through. I know I'm part of why you were arrested, why your life fell apart. If I could take that back, if I could take any of it back, but I can't. So instead, I'm writing to tell you this. Don't let what happened to you make you doubt yourself. Don't let people like me, people who make terrible choices, become reasons for you to hesitate the next time someone needs help. The world needs people like you, people who act on instinct to save lives, people who see human beings instead of criminals or victims or complications, people who choose compassion even when it costs them everything. Maya Chen's family will never forgive me. I will never forgive myself, but I hope someday you can forgive yourself for saving me, because you didn't do anything wrong. You did everything right. I'll spend the next 15 years in here trying to become someone worthy of the second chance you gave me. I'm getting sober, really sober, for the first time in years. I'm working with a victims advocacy group, helping develop programs to prevent drunk driving. It won't bring Maya back. Nothing will. But maybe I can help make sure fewer families suffer the way hers has. Thank you for my life, even though it came at such a terrible cost. And I'm sorry, more sorry than words can ever express, for everything you went through because of me. Robert Mitchum. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table as the sun set outside. Then I did something I didn't expect. I wrote back. Not to forgive him, that wasn't mine to give, but to acknowledge his words, to tell him that healing was possible even in impossible situations, to encourage his work with the advocacy group, because that's what I'd learned through all of this. Complexity isn't something to be afraid of. Life isn't simple. People aren't simple. Sometimes you can do everything right, and everything still goes wrong. Sometimes justice and mercy are at odds. Sometimes you have to hold multiple truths at once, that saving a life was right, and that the life taken still matters, and that consequences ripple in ways we can never fully control. But you act anyway. You help anyway. You choose compassion anyway. That's the lesson I carry now, back at Henderson County Hospital, back in the ER, back to doing the work I was born to do. I don't hesitate anymore. When someone needs help, I help. When someone is dying, I fight for them. Not because it's simple, and not because I'm naive about the complications, but because at the end of the day, this is what it means to be human, to see suffering and respond to it. To save lives, not because we know the whole story, but because a life is worth saving. Period. That night on Highway 42 changed my life forever. It tested everything I believed about justice, mercy, duty, and morality. It cost me my job, my reputation, months of my life, and nearly my future. But it also taught me something I'll never forget. In the moment of crisis, when someone's life hangs in the balance, there is only one question that matters. Can I help? And if the answer is yes, then I act. Every single time. That's not a crime. That's called being human, and I'll never apologize for it again. This story was inspired by the real experiences of first responders who face impossible choices. Have you or someone you know ever had to make a split-second decision that changed everything? What city are you watching from? Share in the comments. Your story matters, and you're not alone. If this story touched you, please share it. Healthcare workers and first responders need to know we support them when they act to save lives. From touching stories, because every life has a story worth telling.